So I recently posted 2 new works on my website, racheldolajal.com. These 2 works are Elk Hide sculpture, and I'm actually in the process of creating a whole series out of this Elk Hide. It's the last Elk Hide I have from my childhood. I grew up on a mountain in Montana. For anybody who's read my memoir, we ate elk and deer and bear and wild turkeys and things on the mountain. So this is the last Elk Hide I have from that era, from my childhood. And so it's kind of autobiographical in a sense. I have a lot of empathy for the animal and don't want to waste any part of that. And by making art, it's almost kind of like giving a rebirth to the animal itself, because the meat was eaten and every part of the animal is used as kind of a way of honoring that life. So these leather sculptures are from this hide, and I just go ahead and cut out an appropriate size piece of the elk hide for each sculpture. I gauge the size of the piece and the placement of the piece based on the flow of the sculpture and also based on the amount of detail that is needed, because the thinner parts of the hide have more ability to conform to certain types of molds. So after I select my section of hide, I am going to then go ahead and run some water in a sanitized kitchen sink and then create a solution. I'm not going to give my recipe for the solution out because it's taken years to develop and probably nobody else is really going to be doing this process anyway. But anyway, so I've come up with a solution that basically will, once the hide is soaked in it, will create an archival sculpted medium. In other words, when this hide dries around a mold, it is going to be rock hard. It's going to keep its shape, hold its shape over time, and unless it's reconstituted or made wet again, it will remain in place. So then I go ahead and build my mold out of found objects. These are some dominoes. I want kind of a falling effect for this piece. I fell down the stairs as a child in the house that I grew up in on the mountain, and also I feel like in many ways I've had different things kind of fall apart in my life through, in a almost a chronic sense. And so I'm creating a piece called Falling, and I also used a toy figure that I then put clay over to sculpt it into the exact expressive shape that I want the figure to be in. And then I'm going to go ahead and lay that on a board and lay the hide over top of all that, and then I nail down the hide around the larger shape, the figure, because that's very hard to conform to that shape. And then I go ahead and just weight down the smaller shapes, those domino shapes, with bags of beans and rice, and you can use small bags of sand or sugar or whatever, but that's what I have. So then I take a sculpting tool to just kind of encourage the leather to stretch around this figure, around the leg parts, especially wherever there's a joint connecting spot on the figure. It's a little bit harder to sculpt. So anyway, and then I'm going to just go ahead and double check on the other part of the sculpture above the figure where the dominoes are underneath, and just kind of make sure that there's a pleasing sort of indentation starting to form. And then I just kind of monitor this over a few days as it dries completely, and then I'm going to show you the finished process once it's dried. So as long as I have the hide soaking, I'm going to actually do another sculpture. And for this one, I'm laying out 3 figures. As you can see, it's like a Power Ranger, a Spider-Man, and a tiny stormtrooper. But this is going to, I'm thinking of the actual form, not, of course, of the objects that are creating the form. I wanted to have kind of almost an ironic sort of piece about family and the this is going to be called the royal family because there's just one child. There were 6 kids in our family, but I feel like there's only one child that's really favored and protected, and that's the oldest son. And so it's just kind of a little bit of a piece about that, and it could be sort of interpreted in many different ways. But anyway, so I'm re-showing you the same process for that piece, the nailing and everything, and then I'm going to show you how both of those pieces dried. So both of these pieces have now dried, and I have them coming off of the board. So what I have to do is take out all of the nails, of course, and then lift the leather off of the board, and you can see that they're very hard. This particular piece, I didn't have any clay on the inside, but it's like just hard, like as if the whole piece of leather was clay or plaster or something. It's very solid. And this particular piece, I actually had some clay on the figure, and that clay is going to stay embedded into the elk hide because it comes off of the figure because of the water kind of sucks that in. And then I'm going to go ahead and stain them, and by staining them I mean adding the color. What I'm doing is I'm using an acrylic polymer immersion to stain them with a raw umber and a burnt umber, and a little bit of blue and a little bit of sienna color, but in different places, just to kind of like make effects of leather, like a dark brown leather surface. So the back will remain rawhide, but the surface, the front of the piece, is where I'm staining with a brush. And I used to, when I was in Montana, when I was growing up, when I first started working with elk hide, because we didn't have an art supply store, so I used to actually use shoe polish and rub that in to kind of get a stained effect on the elk hide. So I think that acrylic is a little bit more archival, of course, than shoe polish. So, and it doesn't rub off. It's just something very permanent. So that's why I use this now as opposed to the shoe polish. Now that I have the choice or the option, you can kind of see my palette there. I'm also going to use an iridescent gold leaf type paint for just the highlights of the figures for the sculpture and the elements in this first piece falling as well, the brick elements above the piece. So just a little side note, you do want a really nice brush because you've got to push this stain paint into the leather with the bristles. So, but you are going to also ruin that very nice brush, meaning that the bristles are, because it takes quite a bit of torque to really push that in. So you're really not brushing it back and forth like you would typically do on a canvas. You're really kind of like pushing it from the ends, toward the handle. And so it just kind of bends the bristles and makes that brush become a staining brush, because it's not going to be great for painting with on a canvas after doing this. So just set aside a nice brush if you ever do try something like this. And, just set aside one brush or so for the staining process. And then for the surface finish, actually, I use a smaller brush to do the gold leaf kind of highlights on the figures. And I really just love the combination of this rich deep umber brown color with the leather, and then also that kind of iridescent gold. Just leather and gold really seem to go well together, and aesthetically it just looks very rich and kind of luxurious, and at the same time contrasts with the very basic and casual nature of course, this elk hide, because it's not a luxury item when you're eating a wild animal off of the side of a mountain out of necessity for sustenance, for food. So there's kind of there are a lot of interesting juxtapositions with the finished result and the origin of the material. In this case, the the Elk Hide. So also your surface, of course, right now I'm working on a 3-ply piece of plywood. So your surface is obviously going to get a lot of paint on it. So just be prepared to have something that's sturdy. And it's interesting because you would think that by putting, water-based solution on top of the hide, and you do have to have quite a bit of water in this paint in order to really get it to soak in and stain the hide. You'd think that it would loosen up the sculptural quality and maybe make the hide a little softer, but it would take dunking this in water over a long time to actually really reconstitute it. It's very sturdy, and the paint itself is going to dry quicker than the hide is going to be made flexible again, if that makes sense. So this process works very well. The paint dries quickly, the hide stays hard and solid, and nothing is going to kind of undo that sculptural quality. And then later I'm going to actually sew hangers. I measure the back of the pieces and sew hangers onto the back so that they can hang on the wall. So this is the second sculpture that I made, and these are the hangers. So I take a wire hanger and kind of loop it on each side, and then I stitch it. It's very hard to get a needle through sculpted hide, but as you can see, I make it happen. And then I also, after securely stitching each of the hangers, I actually put some clear nail polish on the threads just to make sure that they never loosen up or come undone or anything. So it's a very sturdy bas relief piece that hangs on the wall flat on the back, but then has this really nice sense of sculptural quality coming forward in the piece. And you can kind of see the way that gold sort of glistens, and that umber surface, the hide, that brown color of the stain really just looks like the leather was that color all along. So this is my third piece that I've started, and it is in the process of drying, and I'll finish it soon as well. But I just wanted to share a little bit about my leather sculpture process, my Elk Hide sculpture process, and it's just been kind of healing and I don't know, just kind of like a little bit of a sense of closure, I guess, to finally get this hide out of its box. I've had it for over 20 years, and I've just kind of been like pretending it doesn't exist. So to kind of get it out and use it and have a sense of transformation, like making it into something new and beautiful from what is, for me, a very kind of traumatic and painful past. One more just brief thing that I wanted to add is that a lot of people might think that the toys are sort of out of context, but I really feel like they are, very integral to this process, because I've really tried to provide my kids with toys that I never had as a child. And Franklin especially was very into action figures, and Isaiah as well. Langston isn't so much into them, but I still do have a lot of these figures that we've just kept over the years from when Franklin used to play with them, and Isaiah handed them down to him. And so I just kind of feel like this is also, the toys in and of themselves are also part of my journey and part of my story, something I didn't have, and always just trying to work very hard to give my kids a better life and a better childhood than I had.